let's try that again. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time it is, wherever you are, whoever you are. Welcome once again to No Nerd Caliber, the show in which we look at our team's favorite things within a given subgenre of nerddom entertainment. I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber, first-person shooter on Facebook as a cosplay photographer, Burley_adopter on Twitter and a couple of other places, mostly as a tech journalist. And tonight we are going to be talking about, in this case, but our team's favorite totally CGI animated series or movies. It has to be 100% CG. It can't be mostly CG or partial CG. And the reason we're doing that is that our upcoming show, Full Fat Spoiler Chat on Thursday, is going to be looking at the latest, and apparently what was going to be a long line, of He-Man new products, the CGI animated, younger skewed, young adult or teen, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe series that's on Netflix. So if you've seen that and you want to chat about it, or if you don't mind spoilers, join us on Thursday at 8 o'clock. But that's why we're doing CG tonight. And I'm going to just jump right into our first listing. I guess, you know what? It's not entirely true. I'm going to say, before I get into my choices, one of the things that by the time I get to the end of this, you're going to discover, possibly shockingly to a lot of people, not on my list, are any of the CG animated Star Wars series. Clone Wars, Rebels, Bad Batch, they're not in here. And if you've seen my Full Fat Spoiler Chat review of Bad Batch, you'll understand why. I'm not a big fan of the animation. I think the stories are good for the most part. They have a tendency to be a little simplistic because they're often aimed, again, at that sort of young adult or teen audience, whereas they don't have to be. And parts of them aren't. There's a lot in the Clone Wars in particular that's really complex, politically complex and so on. But I just can't get over that animation where everybody bounces. Where, the idea of fast action animation isn't fluid, it's pointy, bouncy. And it's just not for me. So that's why, and maybe everybody who might have been tuning in or who will tune in after the fact and gets to this point goes, oh, no, Star Wars, I'm out. Well, it's your prerogative. Before I get into my choices, let's see, we do have somebody in the chat already, Sans Cup Plush Productions. Hello and welcome to the show. Hopefully the Sans Cup is by choice and not that you've lost it. And that's where we're at so far as chats. All right, so first up is one of the, I think, least or the most unsung anime series in the last 5 years or so. This is Inuyashiki Last Hero. It's an anime from 2017, I believe. Yeah, fall of 2017 anime season. And the story is basically a dad who is in his 50s and looks like he's in his 70s because he's had a really rough life. Is wandering through a park trying to, come to grips with the fact that he's just been given a diagnosis of terminal cancer. And what that's going to mean for his family. He is kind of a sad sack. He's crying a lot at this point. And something from space crashes into the park he's in and kills him. Well, it turns out the things that this is a spaceship, and the things that in the spaceship decide that, that was really mean of them. So they need to do something about that. It's like, well, they can't, resurrect him, just regrow his body or anything. That's not part of what they can do. But they can give him a robot body and basically put his being into it. And that's what they do. Which he is unaware of until he sort of steps into a point where he's seeing some guy getting bullied in another park, and goes into some sort of offensive mode where he comes apart and guns come out. Which it's cool. It's interesting. It's a neat idea. It gets so much more interesting when he decides that once he realizes that he enjoyed stopping these bullies and he wants to try to do good with these powers that he has, but isn't really fully in control of it, things get bloody. And as it turns out, he wasn't the only one in the park, and that's where our villain comes in. And that may be the best thing in this series. The villain is a high school kid. He starts out, as it turns out, as a sociopath or even a psychopath before any of this happens. So it's right out of the gate. What happens if you give these powers to, two people completely by random chance, apparently, one of whom is an older guy who is predisposed to being a nice guy and is certainly, now that he's been given a second chance at life because would otherwise die of cancer, is going to be really good with his powers, and the other one is a straight up, fairly charming sociopath, psychopath, basically. And so this kid, Shishigami Hiro, so the main character is Inuyashiki Ichiro. And he ultimately finds out there's this kid, Shishigami Hiro, who is killing people in a way that doesn't seem like it's possible it can be done. So he eventually figures out that, this kid also has this ability. And that becomes the conflict. Shishigami Hiro is a little bit Light Yagami. He's that interesting a character even as a villain. And I don't do stories in which the villains are given sort of at least as much play as the heroes very much. I don't care for that unless they're really well written, and this is really well written. Which is kind of surprising because, well, yeah, it is and it isn't. It's from a manga from the guy who created Gantz. So if you're familiar with Gantz, two things. One, there are characters in Gantz who can be very complex. And he also does a pretty good job of writing villains where you don't necessarily hate experiencing what the villain is presenting you. The other thing is his artwork is incredibly detailed, and that is why I think that's why they went with CGI for this. If you can see all the detail as Inuyashiki here is sort of coming apart, or opening up and presenting different weapons and things that are in his body. That is the kind of absolutely insane detail that the mangaka of Gantz is known for, and it would have been prohibitively difficult to do in standard 2D hand-drawn animation. So I think that's why they went this route, and they did an excellent job of it. It doesn't look like cheesy 3D animation. One, it helps that everything is 3D. But it even looks better than contemporary products like Ajin, which I really like the first season of. Or even Knights of Sidonia, which I also really liked. It almost made this list. It's just, a better job, and it's not made by a studio that is known for 3D. This is made by MAPPA. MAPPA did, Jujutsu Kaisen, one of my favorite current shows, Dororo Banana Fish, which they do a perfect job of emulating the older art style of a very old manga. Well, not very old, but in manga terms. Zombieland Saga, Dorohedoro, and one of my all-time favorites, Kids on the Slope. So MAPPA has no history whatsoever of doing 3D CGI animation and just nailed it. It's fantastic. Even if you don't like anime series, folks, if you like interesting science fiction and you like really good character-driven stories, it's only 11 episodes. Go watch Inuyashiki Last Hero. From what I understand, because it wraps up in only 11 episodes, it doesn't get into the problem that apparently the manga the second half of its run, it ran for 2 years, is not nearly as good as the first half. This does an excellent job of wrapping things up in 11 episodes. So yeah, Inuyashiki Last Hero, go watch it. It's really, really good. My next item is also an anime series, and again, you'll find that all of my series here are anime. Again, the only other things that are either really old stuff like Reboot, or something that I wanted to put on here, but I just really couldn't because the quality wasn't there. The early 2000s, pretty adult comedy sci-fi anime, Trip in the Rift. Check that out. Gracie Kinesis, Inuyashiki was an amazing anime. Thank you for agreeing with me. It's such a good story. And again, like I said, I don't really like stories of any kind that go out of their way to present to me, the actions of a villain. I don't need to see villain porn, violence porn and so on. But when the character is that interesting, and the voice actor, I've got to give that guy credit. It's one of the most realistic voice acting performances in an anime that I've ever heard. So sort of down to earth and realistically portrayed, it threw me for a second. But then most of the other actors are that way too, and I guess because it concentrated so much on Inuyashiki early on, and he's a really emotional man, that kind of threw me. But anyway, it's fantastic. Thank you, Gracie Kinesis, and welcome to the show. So my second all-CG product, like I said, is also an anime, and it is Land of the Lustrous. So in Japanese, Hoseki no Kuni, which, according to what I read in a bunch of things and here in my anime list as well, more accurately translates to Country of Jewels. But, I guess the English translators thought that might be a little too either on the nose or confusing or both. But the story is, this is set in insanely far in the future. And our main characters are a bunch of genderless beings who you're seeing on the screen right now. That is the main character in the bluish-green hair-ish gem part. Anyway. Phosphophylite. And one of the other primary characters who's very, very important ultimately in Phos's life, Antarcticite. And they're all named after actual gems. Gracie Kinesis, I've heard of this one, but I haven't watched it yet. Gracie, go watch this. First off, it's one of the funniest animes I've seen ever, without going out of its way to try to be a particularly funny anime like Nisekoi or others that are really good at that. It's got such funny moments, but also really, really intense, emotional, tear-jerking moments as well. But the story is these genderless beings are on the Earth, whatever is left of the Earth. They mostly stay around this temple thing that they reside in, live in, I guess. And their job is to fight off these things that live on the moon. And they wind up encountering things that live in the ocean, which is around this land. They may be either on the coast or they're on an island. So you ultimately find out, I don't even want to give that away because this isn't full fat spoiler chat, but you ultimately find out a little bit more about how connected these three different beings or races of things. I don't even call sort of sentient gem or mineral made beings a race, but because they don't reproduce, they make new ones out of particular gem stock that they find occasionally washed up on their beaches. It's pretty weird. But it's also wonderful in that it is 100% a genderless race of beings. They use they. as their pronouns. As you can see, they have what we would consider mostly feminine attributes in eye shape and hair, and hips for sure. But they have no gender characters at all. They have no sexuality at all. They're like dolls. So it's really fascinating. Fos's story as one of the weakest gems. The gems are given jobs based on how their hardness, basically their more scale hardness. And so like Diamond and things like that are the top warriors, and others are not warriors. If you know, Phospholite is a very easily fracturable gem, but Phos grows in ways that none of the others can, and that growth is absolutely fantastic to observe. Again, really smartly written, a great story about sort of growing out of what people expect of you through hardship. No question, a lot of this is based on diversity, and really just fascinating concepts. The opening credit is one of the most wonderful. The OP is one of the most wonderful songs you'll hear, and it's gorgeous. Now, this is done by Studio Orange, which is primarily, not entirely, but primarily known for its 3D CG work. It either did the CG work for other entities where it was a co-studio, like Dimension W, which is also what I consider an underrated show. Others like Norn 9, which I didn't like, Active Raid, which was meh, Black Bullet, which was, it did with Kinema Citrus, and wow. Black Bullet leans really heavily into the Japanese obsession with lolicons. Don't know that I can recommend that one, folks. Gracie Kinesis, yeah, check it out. It's really good. Land of the Lustrous, that is. But Studio Orange went on to make my next choice, which I'll get into very shortly, and also what will be the topic of next Monday's show, which will be an Anime Octane show, and that's going to be the series Godzilla Singular Point, where they worked with Studio Bones to blend 2D and 3D animation absolutely beautifully. There's very little out there other than Ufotable, which does it all on their own, with shows like Demon Slayer and so on, that blends 2D and 3D CG work beautifully. Godzilla Singular Point does it fantastically, and we'll be talking about that. So I guess I kind of gave away my review in Anime Octane, but we'll be talking about that later on next Monday's show. So Land of the Lustrous, also based on a manga, and it's one that this time I think I could recommend it. I've heard nothing but absolutely wonderful things about the manga. I've seen people cosplaying Phos at conventions in a version that is clearly none that I've ever seen, so is from a point forward in the manga. And I'm like, all right, you're not really giving anything away, so I don't mind, and it's a great costume, so let's go. My next one is also from Orange, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, Beastars. Beastars is genius. Beastars is, it's not just that it has one of the best opening and closing OPs in the first season, but it does. Skyman Flyman, yo, welcome to the show. Luminous, Godzilla. If you haven't seen Godzilla Singular Point yet, Luminous, do so. We're putting it back on the docket for Anime Octane next Monday. We took it off for something else. I can't remember what it was. Something that we wanted to talk about. Oh, I know. It was the Evangelion movie. The last, in theory, really last end of Evangelion, in theory. Beastars. Beastars, also by Studio Orange. Absolutely brilliant character writing. Fantastic drama. It is set in a high school um, with, humanoid beast characters, furries, essentially. They said the anime that launched 1,000 furries. Um, the story is that the wolf that you're seeing here, Legoshi, is struggling with his wolf-like tendencies when he almost attacks another student, a little rabbit named Haru, and basically falls in love with her from that point. She is one of the most wonderfully complex female characters in any anime. Just no way around that. Haru is fantastic. Legoshi is fantastic. Louis, who is a deer, and is the sort of prima donna of this school. The school leans really heavily into the dramatic arts, although that's not specifically what it's known for. But then, outside the school, the world around them, it explores. Everybody gives the show a comparison to Zootopia. It explores the relationship between carnivores and herbivores in a way that Zootopia wishes it did. It takes a really adult, or seinen, not adult as in ecchi, but a seinen look at what that relationship might look like in a world where every population is not divided up necessarily by race or ethnicity. They're divided up by herbivore or carnivore. And it's really good. Gracie Kinesis, yes, Beastars was great as well. So that's why it's on this list. Second season was almost as good, and I think the only difference is that it wasn't quite as innovative because you're used to it now. And some of the choices they had some of the characters make was a little tropish, whereas the first season there's almost none of that. That said, it pays off in a huge way by the end of season 2 as well. Just really, really amazing. So yeah, again, if you really like fantastic, character-driven, exciting, dramatic works, also with a fair amount of humor, although it's not nearly as funny as Land of the Lustrous is quite often, but also really innovative takes on some concepts you probably didn't really think might be the case in a carnivore-herbivore relationship, then watch this series. Please watch this series. And the way they take... So this is 3D animation right here. This isn't, a drawn poster. It is 3D animation from the actual series. At times, it looks that good. And it plays with some of the things that 3D lets you do as far as, perception of, things in the dark, color wash, all sorts of really interesting things. So it doesn't look like, again, getting, throwing back to things like Ajin or Knights of Sidonia or so on. It looks like somebody did a great job of 3D animating somehow 2D drawings. And it's actually kind of backwards. They actually did the 3D to look like 2D. So yeah, it's wonderful. Go check it out. My next choice. Okay, now we're getting into some pretty traditional stuff here, but God, The Incredibles is incredible. Pixar, and it's, Brad Bird wrote and directed it. Brad Bird, the creative genius behind so many, amazing Pixar stories, Toy Story and Up and all of those fantastic things. Really innovative animation, a very interesting way of doing 3D that kind of almost looks like claymation without any seams. And and just sort of the way the light smoothly washes across surfaces and so on, the way figures bulge and the stretch and look and things like that. Really wonderful, wonderful animation, and of course, just hilariously funny. One of the best voice casts. I mean, Pixar is known for getting a stellar voice cast. Toy Story alone, obviously has some of the best. But boy, did the people behind, Craig Nelson and Holly Hunter and so on behind Incredibles just knock this out of the park. Gracie Kinesis, I really like the second movie. I can't agree with you on that one, Gracie. And just to be clear, although this looks like it's like the final shot of the first movie, this is actually one of the first shots in the second movie. It just looks so close to the other one that I figured, I might as well use it because it's the same costumes and so on. There were things I really liked about the second movie, Gracie. I didn't particularly care for the plot and how it played the villains. Syndrome is so much more interesting and exciting a villain than the Screenslaver. It took me a second to remember that in the second movie. And when, sort of the big reveal about who they are, or who's behind the whole Screenslaver thing comes out, it's kind of a disappointment. It's like, really? That's what this is all about? Okay. So yeah, I was unfortunately disappointed. Again, there are things, I loved Jack. I loved everything about Jack and Jack's part of the story. Just, yes, please, always. And I liked, and I like Helen's story too. And I guess Bob's story, being sort of a stay-at-home dad and so on. I think that was sort of like, let's give Bob something to do because most of this is really Helen's story. And that makes sense because most of the first, you could say, is Bob's story. I think the balance of, how much screen time and who gets what to do important things is more balanced in the first movie than it is in the second. And again, I don't mind that it's almost entirely Helen's story because that part of it is pretty good until they get to the villains. But anyway, I need one of these. So again, the animation is absolutely flawless. Perfect use of CG in a way where they don't try to make it look like anything other than CG. Like in the first Toy Story, you almost expected the humans to look more realistic than they ultimately wind up doing when you first, really see humans, particularly when they interact with the toys. And you get no expectation of this because everything in this universe is, this CG. Grace, I really mostly like the part when Jack got his powers. Yeah, like I said, anything with Jack in the second movie, I want all of that. I wouldn't mind a story that was literally, Helen and Jack doing stuff. As long as they had a better villain. But yeah, Incredibles is just one of the best, franchises. And people can talk all about how this was essentially an alternative universe story of the Fantastic Four. And it kind of is. About how wonderful the portrayal of Bob is in the first movie, ultimately showing just how incredibly vulnerable somebody that incredibly powerful can be. Edward Palilio, welcome to the show. It did a lot of really, wonderful, innovative things for animation at the time. And so it gets all of the credit for that, but for me, it's Helen's thighs, but anyway. All right, my top choice, my number one, partly because it doesn't look like this so much of the time, is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Everything about this is created in a computer. And it uses so many different appearances of media styles, even though it is all CG, that on that face alone, for that credit alone, this has to be right up there in the top for anybody. But then the story, the voice acting, the Spider-Ham, John Mulaney, again, give him his own spin-off, please. He is so funny. Gracie Kinesis, I love that movie. Into the Spider-Verse, I assume you mean. I also, and Edward Palilio, understandable. If you mean it's understandable that I picked Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, thank you. I think you agree with me. Nicolas Cage, in probably one of his most restrained roles ever, in a relatively small role, and absolutely fantastic. Everybody associated with this thing, writers, the director team, animators, the choice, whether it was the director's choice or some sort of animation director or production designer or whatever, to mix so many different animation media looks, even though, again, it was all done as CG. Whoever is responsible, or whatever groups are responsible for that, well, they deserve all the awards they've won. It's genius. It is absolutely genius. It is, while playing with animation styles that are never seen in any kind of comic book adaptation of an animated comic book adaptation, it is one of the most comic book properties ever made. It gives you the sense of a comic book more than almost anything else that's ever put out there. And I understand Ang Lee tried to do that with the Incredible Hulk, or the Hulk. His is the Hulk. It's really tough to do that with the editing of a live action movie. It's not that tough to do it apparently with CG, and they killed it. Absolutely killed it. So written by Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman, directed by Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman. Just, again, fantastic. And I will listen to or watch Mahershala Ali do anything. So, Prowler / Uncle Aaron. I can't wait to see him as Blade in the MCU. Lily Tomlin as Aunt May. Just so good. Everybody in this is so good. Brian Tyree Henry as Jefferson Davis. Just wonderful. So if you haven't seen this, folks, if you have stayed away from it, maybe because you're not a comic book fan or not a Spider-Man fan, watch it, because if you're an animation fan, there's not much like this that's out there that mixes so many different interesting animation styles. Not just sort of slaphazard throwing it out there. It makes sense when they use a particular style over another style. But that's it, folks. That is my choices for my favorite completely CG products. And, there are people who would argue that maybe, the prequel trilogies could be that. But there are actual human actors that are moving around in this entirely green screen environment. So, yeah, that doesn't count. It's got to be 100% CG. So, that's it, folks. That's my choices. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful comments in the chat. I didn't think with a show this short that we're going to get that, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Tomorrow night, Nerd Week Live, our Nerd News show, and gosh, I've got to make the teaser image for the Facebook event and the YouTube preview. I don't know what to choose. So much amazing stuff, like mind-bendingly amazing announcements happened this last week, that it could be one of a dozen. But anyway, we're going to be talking about those tomorrow night, folks, and I'm sure you've heard of all of them. out of either Nintendo Direct or then a whole bunch of people releasing stuff maybe because Nintendo Direct. Yeah, it's probably going to be Cowboy Bebop. That's probably going to be our teaser. But, it could be so many other things. That's tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. As I already mentioned, this coming Thursday, Full Fat Spoiler Chat is going to be He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, the new All-CG series that is on Netflix. Next Monday is Anime Octane, and we'll put Godzilla Singular Point back on the map. And so I get to talk about Studio Orange again. So, yay. And I hope you folks have a safe week. So we will have a team, and we'll be doing a really interesting thing at New York Comic Con this coming weekend. I will not be there, alas. Life is getting in the way. But our team will be there. So if you see Greg of Wonder Llama Photography, please, stop in to get some pictures. Say hi to Chocobo Butt. Say hi to Danny Darling. And other members of our team. Now, what we're going to be doing, if you're there on Friday, if you are a cosplayer or a photographer, or both, Friday at 2 p.m., up in the Cosplay Central area, which is up the center stairs, going towards the Riverside Pavilion, Luminous once again shouting Godzilla. If you are there Friday at 2 p.m., we're going to be having our cosplay and photography shootout, which we did last New York Comic Con, not last year, of course, in 2019. And we've done it at a bunch of other cons. The gist of it is we ask photographers and cosplayers who want to sign up for a challenge to come up. They sign up, and we pair them or group them. It's always one photographer and one or a couple of cosplayers, depending on how many cosplayers we get, to go out and create an image in a very short amount of time, like 15 or 20 minutes, staying within the venue, and then bring it back to us. The image will be something that best represents a topic that will be voted on out of 3 topics we come up with by the audience. And then our panel will take a look at those images. They'll be projected up on the screen so everybody can see them, and we'll talk about which one, what worked and what didn't in the images, how effective they are at conveying the theme, and ultimately pick a winner. It's a really fun time. It's all of the participants have a blast. The people rushing around trying to come up with some really amazingly creative stuff, given the constraints, the really tight constraints. And this year, everybody's got to keep wearing a mask. So, but if you just want to come and see the images and you watch people run around like crazy, or if you want to participate, Luminous, the Nerd Caliber Cosplay Shootout is great. Thank you, Luminous. Friday, 2 o'clock, up in the Cosplay Central area. Please do check it out. You'll have a great time. We're probably going to be capping it like we have in the last few years at, I think, 10 photographers or 10 teams, 10 or 12 teams, because otherwise we've only got an hour and it would just take too long. Our judges, the guy who came up with this whole thing, Greg of Wonder Llama Photography, who was often on these shows, Spectra V3, Jabri, if you know him, will be one of our cosplay judges. The amazingly talented and good friend of myself and Nerd Caliber, Spectra V3, will be a judge. Chocobo Butt, our Games Bites columnist, and a regular interviewer slash all sorts of things for Nerd Caliber at cons. Also a fairly regular, making fairly regular appearances on these shows. Will be another cosplay judge, and replacing me, I was going to be on there, will be the fantastic Alex of Valderrama Photos, New York-based photographer, just so good. Cosplay and other things, and one of the primary writers on the wonderful web series, oh crap, I just completely forgot the name. Nightwing, Alex, I'll put it up in our chat. Try to remind me what it is. I completely spaced on it. Fantastic DC Nightwing, but general Batman universe DC characters type web series. Really solid. Good work. Good work by the cast as well. But anyway, Nightwing Revelations? Nightwing... yeah, I'm going to screw it up, folks. Sorry. So check us out at one of the upcoming shows. Check us out at New York Comic Con if you're going to be there. And particularly check out the Cosplay and Photography Shootout panel Friday, 2 p.m. And with that, please, folks, stay safe.